Hi there, this is Phil with PhilFX, and this is part 2 of our beginning animation tutorial. We left off at part 1 where we finished just doing a quick animation with manually entered keyframes. And so I want to start this one off with using the auto keyframe feature. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to start with a small sphere again, just like I did the last time, and start with it zeroed up, and I'm going to do it correct this time and work in the XY plane because that's what I'm used to working with. And let's go ahead and we'll position this to a start position over here, and we've got a 50 frame timeline. And to initiate auto keyframing, all you need to do is go in and you click this little red key right here. That turns auto keyframing on. Now, auto keyframing is actually very handy and can help you out quite a bit. I think the biggest difficulty most people run into, myself included, is when you start doing some animating and you turn on auto keyframing, you forget to turn it off when you're done. And if you leave auto keyframing turned on and then you start moving things around, and both shifting time in your timeline and taking objects and moving them around, if you forgot to turn off auto keyframe, all of that moving around both in time and position starts to generate keys, because auto keyframe doesn't know that you didn't want to do that. So biggest thing to do with auto keyframing is use it and let it be your friend and let it help you out in setting up the keys. But when you're done, be sure and turn auto keyframing off. So let's turn that on. And we're going to start, and I'm just going to again keyframe in X and Y, and I have to give it the initial keyframe. So I have to start things off and I say key selected. So then remember what I said last time, we move our time, we take and we set our value. So I'm going to move this over here and go up here, and that keyframed, since I quit moving right there, that will be the keyframe values. As soon as I start to move this time, that's going to lock in this value for that keyframe. So I take my time and I move it to 20. All right, and then I go in and I change my values again, and we'll go over to here. So that locks in my keyframe. Those are my keyframes. If I go back to 10, see that? So it locked in that position there at time 10. So now I'm at position at time 20. All right, I'm going to go out here to time 30, and we're going to lock in some new values. All right, come out here to time 40, come down here and we'll lock in some new values, and then we'll go out here to time 50 and we'll lock in some new values. And so now I'm done. So what do? Go back here and turn off auto keyframing. And so we go back to the beginning and we play this through, and we get a nice animation, and everything was auto keyframe for us. And we can go in and then we can modify and change those as we see fit. Right now, as you can see, it's not playing every frame, it's playing back at 24 frames per second. I can check that by going in. We click this and call this up, and it's the Preferences tab. Like I showed you last time, you click down here and we see that the real time, it's playing back at real time 24 frames per second. While I have this up here, let's look at a couple of these other settings for playback. We have here looping is once or looping is oscillate. Let's click that on oscillate, save, and go back here, and let me take my window, and we'll go here from between 10 and maybe 37, and I'm going to hit oscillate. So I'm oscillating from frame 10 to frame 37, or actually let's take this back down to frame, let's go 10 and frame 30. So I go from frame 10 to frame 30, and now if I hit play, see what it's doing? It's oscillating between 10 and 30. And why you might want to do this, in fact, this is a very common thing to do, is you're trying to zero in on some kind of specific action. Maybe you've got a character and he's swinging a bat, or she's swinging on a swing. You have some kind of action that's going on, and you want to zero in that animation and you want to clean it up. And a very common way to do that is to make your animation oscillate back and forth. And that's basically how you do it. So you set a start time, you set an end time here on these inside frames, or inside entry points, okay? And then we hit stop. You go call up your preferences on the time slider, and you say that you want to oscillate. The other setting here is looping once. So if we did this, go back to the beginning, and we play it through, it just plays it once. And that might be handy if you just want to manually control the going back and forth. That's actually where this is really pretty handy. Instead of having it looping continuously, you can loop it manually yourself, and you can control that. Let's just go forward once, let's just go back once. Maybe you want to change some settings, and then you go forward again, then you want to change the settings and go back again. And by having it just go once, that's actually a very handy thing also. So you can control the way that it iterates and goes back and forth. And the other thing I wanted to demonstrate real quick, when I said that just about any kind of parameter can be keyframed, let me demonstrate that. Let's go in here, and I'm going to right click on this, and I'm going to add a new material. So let's put a favorite material. Let's put a blend on this, okay? So we have this blend color up here, and let's start with a color that's red, okay? And we'll go back to time 0. And one thing I can do, I can click on any of these parameters. I can click on color. Look at that. What do I have? I can set the key. All right. I can look at translucence depth. I can set a key. So these parameters, all these parameters that you see, pretty much anything, if I can right click it and I can set a key, that can be keyframed. So let's do this, have a little fun here, and we'll go and we'll take the color, and we're going to set a key, and we're going to key that color. Alright, and then let's go out here to frame 25. Alright, and so what do? We remember we set the time, change the value. So let me go in here, and I'm going to change that to blue, and I'm going to right click, and I'm going to set a key. And then we go out here to time 50 and click in here. I'm going to change that to red, go right click and set a key. So now if we go back to the beginning and we play this through, you can see that the color of my ball goes from red to blue, and you can actually see that transition there, and it transitions to blue. And notice that in between that, okay, so here was, I set the key as for the color at 25, so here's the key at 25 for blue, and then we go back here, it's red, and right around 12 it's just in between. In other words, the color is purple. Same kind of thing, we're at 25, we're completely blue, and then about midway in between we're purple again, and then by the time we get to the end we're red. Alright, so you can see the versatility of this, of how there's a number of things that you can do with keyframing different kind of parameters. So the next thing you want to do when you're animating is you get your animation all done, and you really need to do some editing on that. And Maya has a very nice editor for keyframes. It's a waveform editor, and you can access that a number of different ways. You can go up here to the window, go into animation editor, and you go into the graph editor, excuse me, and that will open up the window for editing your keyframes. The way I typically do it is I just go down here, and on the buttons that we have on the side, I go down to this bottom one and I click on that, and that opens up the graph editor on the bottom. So those are the two ways. Let's actually go back to here and I can work with the animation editor. Let's open up the graph editor right here so we can see that a little bit bigger, and we can see our ball here on the side. And so you notice what you have here. First off, these are the things that are keyframed, and I have the translation in X and the translation in Y. Alright, and so these are the translate keyframes. If I go in here and we can show them both at the same time, and this graph panel right here works very similar to how you move things out here in a perspective camera. So I can go in and I can hold down Alt and I can right mouse click, and I can take and I can scale things up and scale things down. That's just I'm holding down the Alt, or on Mac it would be Option, and I'm just dragging with the right mouse button clicked. Okay, if I hold down Shift and Alt and then I drag in a particular direction first, so I'm holding down Shift and Alt, and if I drag essentially going left to right, then I change the scale in my I have more resolution between my keyframes. Alright, so I can expand my scale that way. If I hold down Alt and Shift and I drag up, then I have more resolution in my vertical scale, which is my values. Alright, so if we take this and I can stretch this out just a little bit and scrunch that in, and I can hold down Alt, and now with middle mouse button clicked I can take and I can drag that and pan. Okay, holding down Alt and clicking on the left mouse button actually makes no sense, because in when you're in your perspective view, that's where you orbit the camera, and orbiting a camera on a two-dimensional graph really makes no sense. But holding down Alt and the middle mouse button allows me to pan back and forth. So I can pan back and forth, I can scale just a little bit and then scale just a little bit this way and then pan it. So I can pretty much get the whole graph in my field of view. Alright, so this gives you a lot of ways that you can change how your graphs appear. So for the moment, let me just look at the Translate Y, and let's click on that so we can see that, and we can hold the hide the Translate X. And so you can see the rounding, the smoothing. Remember when I said there's a smoothing that goes on? It depends on what the defaults are set, and so you can see this smoothing in terms of the motion. What you're seeing here is it's graphing the motion in between of how the path that this particular ball makes in the y-axis. Alright, so we're seeing that the ball goes up and comes down, it goes up and comes down. So there, if I click on this, if I click on the whole graph, you can see that we actually have Bezier handles on each of these points. Alright, and I can go in and I can select the entire graph and move it, which is what I'm doing at the moment, or I can select one point and I can left mouse click on that point, and you can see I can drag that up and down, or I can drag that left and right. Alright, now one thing it's a little tough to see, okay, the graduations on this, so you can see right here is I have a grid line every 2 frames. So we have 10, 12, 14, 16. Notice when in here, this is showing my actual values. So this is frame 10. Right down here we can see that this is frame 10, and it has a value of 11.806. Alright, if I click and drag on this, it snaps to frame 11. Notice that I'm right here on the graph. I'm between frame 10, frame 12, so that snaps to frame 11. It's snapping on frame 11 because I have this little magnet right here on my x-axis, and it defaults to having that turned on. What that does is that makes sure that I snap to every frame. I don't snap in this way in between frames. Now actually will let you turn that off, and I can position this in between and almost on a frame. Look at that. So I'm on frame 13.66, which really is a little bit nonsensical, because when you render out, you don't render frame 13 and then render frame 13.6 and then render frame 14. That's not how it works. You're going to render frame 13 and you'll render frame 14. But it will allow me to place a keyframe actually in between integer frames. I would not recommend doing that as a beginner. That can maybe mess you up and get you into some problems, and actually for a lot of the animations that we're doing for class, it's not necessary. So for right now, we'll leave, when you work with this, I'd recommend just leaving, make sure you're snapping in the X direction here, in the frame number, you want to have that snapping turned on. All right. Just another quick thing, when you go in and you grab one of these keyframes and you start to move it, if you hold down Shift before you start to drag, it'll lock how you are changing things. So I hold down Shift, I'm holding down the Shift button and I'm dragging, and notice, okay, I can't make the value. I'm now clicking my mouse and I'm dragging it up and down, but I can't change the up and down value. Why? Because my first move after I started sliding was in the back and forth, the right and left action. And so what it does is it says, okay, I'm going to restrict your movements to only be moving this value in frame number and not in its amplitude. All right. I could likewise select this again, and then I'll hold down my key, my Shift key, and now I drag up and down, and now I can't go left and right. All right. I can't drag it left and right. It restricts me to only changing that value up and down. All right. This is really kind of nice because then I can go in and I can get things pretty close. Let's say if I wanted these two values to be exactly the same, I could go in and put this up to a number right there. I'm close to -6. I could actually type in -6 and hit return, and then I can go grab this one and I can go in and say -6. And so that's a way that you could put in an initial animation, and you can have some values that are close, and then you can go in and you can actually make them equal by just putting in the actual numbers that you want. Let's look at a couple other things. All right, so these little icons here speak to the different kinds of interpolation that you can have between keyframes. I'm going to walk through just a couple of the common ones. So this is the default that Maya always starts out with, and you see that we have an easing in and an easing out. All right. If I click this one, this third one down, so this is the default. If I click this third one down, now we have a linear interpolation. All right. So we can see that we have straight lines going up and down. What this means is my value from keyframe to keyframe to keyframe, the amount it changes in each one of these steps from keyframes is exactly equal. It follows a straight line. All right. This is not what is considered to be an organic, and even mechanical things have a very difficult time in trying to move things. I mean, if you've got a car engine or an electric motor in particular, motors are said to be very linear, and in fact they are, except for the fact that when they start up, they still don't just instantly start at a speed. They take a while to get up to speed, and then they take a while to stop and change direction and then come back down at a different speed. So this is handy, and there are times where you may need this kind of interpolation, but it's really not natural. This is a more natural kind of interpolation. I click back on here. Another very handy one, though, is what's called a step interpolation. All right, if you've done any kind of animating in After Effects, this is where you set a keyframe and the value does not interpolate between the points. What happens is the value stays here initially at one point. So if we go back to here, the value stays fixed. All right, and so right at this point, it's at has a value of -0.48. I can actually make that just 0. All right, so we'll make that at keyframe 1. It has a value of 0. And then out here at keyframe 11, it's going to instantly snap to a value of 13.95. And if I hide this and we walk this through, you can see that. You see what that's doing? Okay, so it's not interpolating between the points. Now we are moving in the X direction, but there is no smoothing of how this goes between the y-axis. Now you might ask, why would I use that? Maybe not necessarily for motion, but maybe you have some kind of a light in your scene and you want to blink that light on and then you want to blink it off, and you don't want the light to be gradually turning on and gradually turning off in between, well, you'd keyframe it using this kind of a step keyframe. So it's off, 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 and then instantly on, and then it's off, and then it's on, and then it's off, and then it's on. So this is a way that you can make things essentially jump. So we have the step keyframing, the linear keyframing. I'm going to do that. I want to do it for the whole thing. So we have step keyframing, linear keyframing, and eased keyframing. I think for our beginning class, that's really the things that you need to worry about most. The other thing you may want to do, though, is you may want to take these Bezier handles and you might want to change how things approach. And if you're familiar with working with After Effects, or excuse me, with Illustrator or anything that uses Bezier handles, you're used to be able to grabbing a handle and move that. Well, you can do the same thing here in the graph editor. So I could grab this point and I left click on that point and I can drag that. Okay, so you can see how you can shift that Bezier handle and you can move how that waveform looks by changing how that Bezier handle moves. And then the other thing you typically would like to do is you like to be able to break a handle. Okay, well, you can do that also. If we go up to here and if I click on this, that allows me to break a handle. Alright, so I have that enabled. I can select on this and I can break that handle. So you can see here that I can go in and now I can pretty much break how this handle is moving. Alright, and then if I go and click this button, I can actually take and move both handles together. See that? Alright, this can sometimes end up with some very strange kind of snapping. Okay, you can see what's going on there. It's kind of, you end up with some strange results sometimes. The other thing you typically would like to do is you say, well, that was interesting, but that's really not what I want. What I'd like to do is I'd like to get back to having a straight across Bezier handle again, and you can do that. We just click on that. We click over here on this guy right here with this keyframe, keyframe selected, and we get back to our tangents that are snapped together. So we've talked about how we can modify things. The other thing that is one of the most powerful things with Maya is how you can take and you can slide things in scale, in time scale. And so let's go in here and let me grab 4 keyframes. Notice I didn't select the end one, or the beginning one rather, and the end one. I selected the 4 in the middle. And we can go over here, and this box right here allows me to essentially set up a lattice deformer. And I can change values of my keys by essentially deforming this lattice. So see how I can take and I can change the value of the lattice, and I'm changing the keyframe values by essentially deforming this lattice. All right, so that's one way of modifying keyframes. All right, let's go back here and do another one. And another way to do this is you can use a region tool. This is a little more common. Notice that the region tool is bounded by the keyframe limits. Okay, so the top is at this topmost value and the left is at this leftmost value for this keyframe right here. The right is limited on the right side by this value of this keyframe, and because these two bottom ones are the same value, this bottom guy is right down here. So then I can click on this region and I can just take and drag things across. So this allows me, so I can compress in time and in value my keyframe values simply by creating this outside regional box, and then I can compress things inside that box, and it'll slide all the keyframes inside that box proportionally together. Again, that's a very powerful tool. Allows you to retime things and edit your keyframes. The last one I want to show you is where you can essentially pick arbitrary regions for retiming. So it says on here, double click to do the retiming mark. So I want to retime right between this midwave right here and let's say this one right here. So now notice I'm not locked on this keyframe value or anything else, and in fact I'm really in between some keyframes, but I can go down here and I can click, excuse me, and I can click on this bar, and now I can slide things. And again, everything outside this region stays as it was, but it drags things forward and it keeps things here, and all the retiming is done, everything within inside this arbitrary region that I defined. So again, another powerful tool that allows you to retime your keyframes, and you can do it essentially on an arbitrary region. Let's undo that. All right. So I think that pretty much demonstrates the things that I wanted to show for class. This is an extremely powerful waveform editor. Really, to do it justice, you could do numerous tutorials, quite long in fact, to cover all of the attributes and features that the waveform editor can do for you. But I think for the beginning class and the things that we're doing in our class, this covers the main features of what I wanted to demonstrate and show to the class. So we've covered putting in keyframes, how to do keyframes with the automatic keyframes. Again, remember, when you do auto keyframes, be sure and turn auto keyframes off when you're done. We've demonstrated how to keyframe other things other than just translations, like we were keyframing the color, and we also did some quick demonstrations on the waveform editor. So hopefully you'll find this beneficial, and this has been Phil with Phil Effects. Catch you later and have a great day.